Hey everyone, and welcome back to the news. Well, you know what, it actually has been quite a hard week. We've got all the job losses at Blizzard, and there really is a lot to talk about there. And today I'm going to talk about how that whole situation could impact World of Warcraft. Past that though, we actually do have interesting stuff. We have new allied race hints, and actually a very interesting design change that I really think could be quite major for the future. Now, you've probably noticed things look a bit different around here. It's not a permanent change. This is where I record the videos for my variety gaming channel. So yeah, I'm just waiting on delivery before the regular WoW area is back in action. So you'll be back to the familiar backdrop pretty soon. Okay, well, let's get into the news, and clearly the layoffs are the most important thing to talk about. Now, I have already covered this in great detail on my other channel, and rather than repeating myself, I am going to link to those videos. They cover the earnings call, the US layoffs, and the impending EU layoffs, as well as a long-standing criticism of how Blizzard conducts itself, and that's based off stuff that I've consistently heard for years. With that being said, though, of course, this is the World of Warcraft channel, and I think we do need to talk about how this could impact World of Warcraft. Now, to quickly get everyone up to speed, Activision-Blizzard decided that they wanted to focus on core development, and they decided that they had overhired in a number of other roles, such as community management, esports, management, QA, and more. And because of this, they're reducing their overall workforce by 8%, and then they're hiring on 20% more developers across the organization. Now, this was all in spite of record profits, and I think it is key to remember here that companies, they actually don't have a large social obligation to provide for people who they don't want past, contractual obligations. Blizzard did not decide that they could not afford these jobs. They decided that they did not want these job roles. And yes, that is cold, but that is business, and I think that's why, you should be in work at 5. I think you should work to 5, and I don't think people should be putting in passion hours after that into a company where you don't have skin in the game, especially with a large corp like this. Now, if you've got a lucrative bonus structure, you've got stock options, profit share, sure, but for most companies, most jobs, no, I don't think so. And I think it serves as a wake-up call that as much as many of us love IPs, I think it's unhealthy to have an overly massive emotional investment really in a company. But overall, though, my heart goes out to the people who have been impacted. I hope they'll land on their feet, and I hope, that'll be at companies that are a bit less prone to exploiting employee passion. But again, for the full picture, check out the other channel. There really is a lot to go into. As for Warcraft, well, from what I understand, much of the back-end CM team is gone. I know that Caden, it's hard to pronounce that name, on the forums, he's also gone. And yeah, he was one of the most visible World of Warcraft community managers, and he is, doesn't have a job there. And it really is quite interesting because he was particularly engaged with streamers, including those who were not squeaky clean, like Blizzard would want. And I hope that that does not have anything to do with him in particular being cut. But, anyway, he was quite well loved by the community at large, but I can tell you that by streamers and people who make content, he was also quite loved. And for a lot of us, it does feel like we've lost an advocate. That said, he now seems to be a successful streamer, so he seems to be landing on his feet. Now, much of this has actually led to lore getting quite a bit of hate. And that is rather unfortunate because lore being less visible in the forums is actually more of a reflection of his job role. Ultimately, you might not know this, but many of the larger posts that Yizin's, I'm just going to call him Caden from now on, because I think that's his name or whatever, but a lot of things that he says, they're actually written by lore and then posted, by him. The two of them form a team, with Caden being the front man. So yeah, I think that really much of what lore has been getting is pretty unfair, and to be honest, yeah, I mean, the guy has been memed to oblivion a little bit. Now, thankfully, most of that is just good-natured fun, last Wednesday in my shaman and all that stuff. But I think he probably would get a lot less flack from people, I think, if he spent less time backing up Ian's points in the Q&As and less time making examples. I don't think they're really kind of hitting his intended mark, and I think a lot of people perceive them as being kind of snarky and talking down. Now, I don't actually think that's what he intends at all, and from everything that I hear, I think, he really does care a lot, but I think that's part of what explains the sort of messy CM situation we find ourselves in at the minute. Ultimately, though, launching a flame war on one of the very few remaining WoW CMs is a very unproductive thing, especially because these layoffs have probably hurt him a lot and put a real spanner in the works. I'm fairly sure that lore has a number of projects, or had a lot of projects in the works, things that would have been aimed at improving community communications. But guess what? The people who he probably wanted to have working on those have likely been laid off. It does seem like a massive blow, and to be honest, Blizzard had better watch out. I mean, lore is a pretty entertaining and successful streamer. I mean, I'm sure he'd do just fine. going his own way, being free from all the random corporate rubbish that just seems to get thrown his way and getting, in the way of things that he actually has planned and wants to do and the good changes he wants to make. Now, on that, I know that Caden was actually planning a pretty comprehensive class feedback initiative that would have involved the class discords. I mean, yeah, CMs, they really do care about feedback. What has happened to that plan, though? Well, from what I hear, that plan is actually dead because the people who would have been executing the plan are gone. So at least for now. Past that, I know there was a private class feedback forum that has existed for a long time, I believe being kicked off by Ghostcrawler way back in the day. There had been plans to revive that, but that's something that likely has, or is not going to happen, or has been slowed down. Past that, I have also heard from a few sources that their QA department can't field a full Mythic raid team anymore. We know that there have been heavy QA layoffs as well. And I mean, Battle for Azeroth, let's be real, it has been of pretty unacceptable quality in the quality assurance regard, so seeing those key staff be laid off, that is a big problem. And, all these roles have been described as non-development roles. Now, part of that is true. I mean, they're not building the engine, they're not producing the art assets, things like that, but let's be real, that's a pretty narrow picture. They absolutely are key people to the development process. Community managers are there to be the voice of players. They're there to keep the ears of the developers to the ground so they know what's happening in their game. And let's be real, that is something that Blizzard has massively struggled with World of Warcraft. And it's only going to get worse now that there are fewer community managers. As for quality assurance, again, like the CMs, they're totally a part of the development process. Saying the Blizzard has laid off people in non-development roles, well, that really does downplay the vital contribution that those people make to Blizzard's games, and to be honest, it does greatly underplay the negative impacts of their departure. Now, having a 20% boost in dev headcount, that might be a good thing, but it is kind of hard to tell. Right now, the thing I'm mostly concerned about is the quality of the decisions being made by the team. It doesn't matter how much content they pump out if the basis of that all is a bit messed up, and BFA, I think, does prove that point. Plus, sometimes having more people slows down production as you get the new people up to speed. Mists of Pandaria is actually, Mists into WoD is a pretty good example of that, where they massively increased the headcount of the WoW team, but it actually was a real challenge for them getting that new team up to speed and actually getting production going, because turns out if you have 60 new people, that's a lot of work getting them all up to speed and integrated into the team. Now that said, while, the quality of the decisions being made by the dev team is my biggest concern, I'll say this: if BFA had a Suramar equivalent, yeah, I think it would have lasted a bit longer for many people. As, with BFA, you hit endgame and you were just straight into the totally transparent gamey, endgame progression systems. There wasn't much RPG there. And maybe if they had a higher headcount, they would be able to put, more Suramar and stuff like that in there. But yeah, I mean, it's challenging. More than ever, though, right now, it is on the developers to understand their community because a lot of their support is gone. Unfortunately, I do think the devs are in a bit of an internal echo chamber. They, I think, have constantly misread their community, and that's been something that's been, let's be real, very useful to people like me. It's allowed me to be a step ahead of the game most of the time. I mean, you guys all know this as well. Like, we've all been able to predict community reaction seemingly better than the developers have, and I mean, it's not great, is it? So yeah, there we go. I think that's really all that I have to say about this. I know it is a pretty negative topic, but let's be real. When 800 people lose their jobs, and many of those people are in very key roles, really key, they are basically development roles, it definitely is cause for concern, and we have to be real about that. We can't just go around sugarcoating it. It is definitely a big point of concern. Next up, though, you know what? We actually do have some really good news, and this is really exciting. The Crucible of Storms has interesting loot. Like, really, really cool things. Weapons that have green text and abilities, plus some really cool visuals. So, let's just go through these because, trust me, I think this is really exciting for the future of the game. We have a staff called the Pillar of the Drowned Cabal, and that has an on-use effect that places a ward in your target. If that target takes 39k damage in a single hit, the ward will heal them. It's full-on just another healing ability through your weapon. There's another really interesting one, the Gloves of the Undying Pact. These tether you and 5 allied players in 20 yards, and after 20 seconds, you get healed for 20% of the healing that they all got, up to a certain cap. There's then Cloth Feet that increase your speed by 200 every 20% health you have, up to a maximum of 600 speed. And that's going to really kick in those clutch moments where maybe, you're running towards the priest barrier and they can't, life grip you over. It's really cool. For leather, we have some legs that, when you're above 60% health, cause your abilities to fire off an extra lightning bolt or something to do a bit more damage, but below 60% have a chance to heal you. There's plate that causes you to get a stacking crit buff from your auto attacks that disappears if you take any damage. Past that, there's even gloves that will instantly heal you when you go under 25% health for a decent chunk, but then will slowly do a damage to you equal to that heal as a damage over time, which is another really cool effect. Now, that's just a selection from the first boss, but as we move on to the second one, there's even more cool things, and we're going to start off with the trinkets. So there's the Void Stone. This shrouds a target, absorbing the next chunk of damage or healing taken. It just blocks all of it, which again is pretty cool. It's playing with fire, but it certainly could be quite powerful. Next, there's the Harbinger's Inscrutable, I think, will. Now, this is a trinket, and it gives abilities a chance to fire off a Void or an Oblivion Spear at the enemy. It does damage, and then it returns back to you, and you have to dodge it. If you don't dodge it, you get silence for 0.5 seconds, which again is really cool. That adds a new dimension to your gameplay, and I just love these risk-reward effects. You then have the Idol of Indiscriminate Consumption that feeds on 7 nearby allies or enemies, I think up to 4,000 health, roughly, from each of them, and then it heals you even for 200% of the damage dealt. Once again, risk-reward, really, really, really cool. It means as a tank, it could be great if you're taking heavy single-target damage, but otherwise have a team who are in really good shape. You've got the Lurker's Insidious gift that increases mastery for 30 seconds, but for every second it deals shadow damage to you, and the next time you use it, it cancels the effect early. Yet more risk-reward. We then have a weapon, the Trident of Deep Oceans. Taking damage has a chance to form a bubble around you for 15 seconds that absorbs 25% of incoming damage, and when the bubble bursts, you get a primary stat buff. And as for the rest of his gear, there's even more cool stuff. You've got plate legs that mean that if an enemy has less health than you, your abilities deal extra damage, but also sacrifice your health to deal that damage. That'll make for a very intense execution phase for sure. Again, really cool. We have mail gloves that when above 90% of your health give you a very high chance to deal extra shadow damage. There's the Insurgent Scouring Waist Wrap, which seems to summon in aberrations, and then when you kill them, you get a group buff. You've got some cloth legs that open a void fissure below you, and they increase haste while you stand in it, but if you leave it, then it damages you. Right, so these are all, these are all subject to iteration, but it's so cool to see Blizzard experiment with effects like these, especially in a world where we're stuck with pretty damn boring Azerite gear. Now, most of these things, they open up new gameplay possibilities, or at the very least, they give you some decision making, right? And that's really cool. And with Crucible only being a small 2-boss raid, I feel like Blizzard think this is a safe place to experiment because it's not taking up the design space of a full tier. So they can experiment, they can go a bit mad, they can see what works, they can see what doesn't work, and hopefully that paves the way for more interesting loot design in the game, which I absolutely commend because loot's been really boring in the game for a while. So I think that would be really cool. And you know what? That is gear that I would be legitimately excited to go out and earn. The only worry I'd have is that maybe, how they compete with a Titanforge Mythic Plus trinket that just has really high stats but doesn't require extra decision making. We'll just have to see how that balance pans out. But in my view, this gear with the risk reward absolutely should be stronger. Next up, we have a potential allied race hint. There seems to be an encrypted alpaca mount in the most recent build of patch 8.1.5. Now, who uses alpacas in Battle for Azeroth? That's pretty simple. The Vulpera do. Now, mounts are usually encrypted if they're part of a major spoiler or are part of the in-game store. Assuming they're encrypted for the former reason, then this could be hinting at the Vulpera making their way into the game as an allied race. Now that does make me wonder, is this Horde only? Is it for both factions? I mean, they don't seem massively Horde aligned culturally, though, of course they do extensively work with the Horde, over on Zandalar. Now, that said, them being a neutral allied race, that would be something new, and actually it would allow Blizzard to release them on their own, not having to worry about making an alliance counterpart, and if they just want the quick bump of subs that a new allied race would bring, that could be a viable option. And of course, as we know, the smaller, more cute races are extremely popular in so many games, so like it or not, it kind of seems to make business sense. And really, if 8.2.5 had these, it totally would lead to a spike of players coming back, and it would be a pretty solid business decision. Now, if the alpaca is encrypted because because it's a store mount, then yeah, let's be real, that would be bad, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We can deal with that if it's actually confirmed to be happening. Now, past that, there is another update in mount news. The Alliance Wolf mount now has a Horde Horse counterpart, and you get both of them for completing the Alliance and Horde war campaigns. Not as interesting as a traitor storyline, but hey, I suppose it is reasonable enough. And there we go, that's it for the news. Honestly, a terrific design direction on the World of Warcraft front for their gear design. I'm so excited to see how that goes. But, you know, the rest of the events for this week are really quite sad. And, you know, they could be bad for the game in the future. We need to be real about that. Ultimately, we just have to wait and see what happens, but certainly seeing losses in QA, seeing losses in community management, especially when those are both areas where they have struggled, it is hard to see how those losses will, make the game better, right? So definitely is a bit of a worry. But of course, if you want to hear more about that stuff, check out the other channel. There's so much content there. I've actually got an Anthem review coming up pretty soon. Hopefully a Metro Exodus review coming up pretty soon as well, of course, as lots of gaming news. And believe me, we have really big plans for that channel. It's going to be a lot bigger than it is right now. So yeah, it's worth checking out. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.